Hey, what's up? This is Udulena from Udulena Digital. Welcome to my channel. Every Sunday I post a new video here on topics which I really like commenting on my favorite books and movies, as well as politics and history. I work for Google, but everything that I share here is my own personal opinion based on literature and books that I share and read in my free time. Having said that, today's topic is a really interesting book called Black Rednecks and White Liberals. Welcome to my channel and be sure to subscribe. The topic today is pretty interesting and it attracted me a lot because of the current events over the summer, let's say in the United States and here in the UK as well. There was a lot of talks about Black Lives Matter, a lot of people were trying to talk about history without really understanding history. This book really came on time for me, as I've been reading a lot of other literature on the topic, let's say more kind of towards liberal, white liberal type of literature, and this kind of came as a very sobering and refreshing book, which I really recommend you to read in order to understand the topic thoroughly. Who is Thomas Sowell, the writer of this book? He is Afro-American black professor in Stanford, and he is also a very good friend of Milton Friedman, defender of the free capitalism, the neoliberalism. You can check my video about neoliberalism and liberal idea in here above. So the book itself has a main idea, which I think it's groundbreaking and it's so simple, and I don't understand how it has been missed so far when discussing the problems of racism in America. And this is that blacks nowadays in the United States specifically are not held back typically by racism. They are held back by a culture which they have, let's say, decided that this is their true identity, whereas this is a redneck culture. Let's talk about the redneck culture. Where does this come from? It's actually strange to think that the redneck culture, which he believes is what the black people adopted from the poor white on the south, originated in England. On the border between England and Scotland, kind of the Northlands, the no one's land, where in the 16th and 17th century, let's say more of the 16th century, there was a very different scene from what it is now. And this is why it's so difficult to imagine, because we believe that England is this cultured country of refined manners and education, but that was not the case 400 years ago in this part of England. And settlers in the southern states, in Alabama, in Texas, let's say the big slave owner states in the in America, were mainly predominantly coming from this part of England. So their culture, let's say the redneck culture, is described in literature, in memoirs, in descriptions from this period, and it has the following characteristic. It is very violent. There's absolute disrespect for the law. Everybody takes the law in their own hands. They are gangs. They are fighting between each other. There is touchiness and pride, so someone can explode suddenly and kill someone because they didn't give them respect. People feel proud about something that it's difficult to understand what. The Yankees, for example, could not understand the pride of the Southerners. Like, what are they proud about? We don't get it. But this was some kind of like a inherited touchiness about your ego, that anybody who said something or who looked at you funny is your enemy, and you are okay to shoot them down right there, right now. Some other characteristics are absolute disdain towards education and educated people. That's a waste of time, that's for pussies. There was also neglect to children and promiscuity, a lot of children being born outside of marriage. All these characteristics were absolutely described about when people talked about the Scots and the Northern Englanders who recently settled in the United States in the 17th century. It's insane to talk about this, but these sound and resemble a lot to, let's say, the rules and the characteristics of urban gangster culture in black ghettos today. And Thomas Sowell argues that pretty much the freed blacks in the United States inherited this culture from the white rednecks, let's say the poor whites of the South, who they were in contact with. this type of emotionality, this type of even drama, tendency to dramatize everything, a tendency to be easily emotional, to explode, and of course a lot of counterproductive qualities, which essentially served a very, very bad favor to Black people. And what's interesting is that it's not so simple. Let's say Black people who were in the South in contact with this redneck culture, white culture, were completely different to Black people who came from the Caribbean to the United States, who were also ex-slaves, but they were in contact with a different culture. So they were very different. Let's say they were much more organized, they were able to run businesses, shops, and pretty much the most distinguished figures in America from Black origin are actually from Caribbean origin, including Kamala Harris, who is from Jamaican origin. So there was a different attitude towards education, towards marriage, towards family. And also what's very interesting is that it is not just that over the last 150 years the redneck culture was just conserved and stayed the way it was. It was actually in a huge decline, and it was, in his opinion, it was about to disappear if it was not for the white liberals. So he gives data that up to the 1960s, the rate of children, of Black children being born in marriages was increasing, and it was in general, illegal children, let's say children born outside of marriage, was very low. It was about 30%. How come in the 90s this number raised to the 70%? What would be the future of these children? It's much more difficult for them to be educated, for them to have a proper childhood when there's only one single mother. Then he talks about crime rate. So crime rate was declining across Black males up till the 1960s. But somehow after the 60s, both of these trends started reversing. It was more crime, more children being born outside of marriage, more broken families, lack of education, lack of wealth, poverty increasing and kind of perpetuating into a cycle. And he believes that this is actually the blame, not race and the racism by itself, because actually people were on the right way. Let's say Black people are on the right way, but it has to blame with the white understanding of what Black culture is. And the promotion of the victimhood mindset from white liberal politicians, historians, and intellectuals, that for some reason, because of the slavery that happened, Black people are doomed to have no success in life in the country of big opportunities, of the unlimited opportunities. They are limited because of racism and because of slavery. And this type of victimhood and this type of portrayal of Black people actually caused terrible, terrible consequences to the community. Also, the idea that to be Black, you must be thinking in a certain way, you must be voting liberal, you must support liberal leaders. Even Joe Biden recently said to a Black influencer on YouTube that he should vote for him because otherwise he's not Black. What does that mean? A white person saying to a Black person how he should vote and otherwise he's not Black? And this kind of expectations that Black should think in a certain way, act in a certain way, speak in a certain language, maybe speak not so correctly English, with a bit of a jargon, with a bit of a ghetto accent. And if they speak in a different way, in a more cultured way, they might be accused of acting white, which probably Thomas Sowell has been accused himself. Also, he mentions that Black children in American schools may be easily accused by other Black children, if they're studying a lot, that they are acting white, that they are not, they're trying to accommodate themselves to the white culture. But he believes that accommodating yourself to the white culture or the winning culture, let's say in economical, in social sense, let's say the culture that brings achievements and results, is the only way for Black people to continue and to prosper. He believes that all the cultures, and there are a variety of cultures he discusses in the book, actually prospered in the United States because of their culture, or because of changing their culture to a more productive one. Let's say the one that was rewarded with achievements. Because essentially where self-esteem and where wealth, where value of the individual comes from is from achievements. American culture is a meritocracy. It's about what you can do in the world, what value you're bringing to the market, what you're good at, what you're doing, what kind of business you have, if you're an entrepreneur, what are you providing to the market. If all you are providing to the market is a counterproductive culture which disdains education, disrespects the law, it's acting in a certain way, kind of like counterproductively, then you would not expect great results, and you cannot blame racism for it. Second, he talks about the slavery itself, and this is a super interesting part. When we talk about slavery, for some reason, always the talks are that somehow the whites enslaved the blacks because of race. And this is way, way far from the reality. Slavery existed for thousands and thousands of years, pretty much from the dawn of civilization, and people were enslaved by their own people and by their own race. Whites would enslave whites. For example, the Slavic tribes and Slavs from Eastern Europe were widely enslaved in medieval Europe because they were more vulnerable. And even the name Slav comes from a slave. So I'm from Slavic region, so should I ask for reparations now? Also, in the Ottoman Empire, it was typical for Turkish to take Bulgarian slaves, and I'm from Bulgarian origin. So should I now sue every Turkish person because of the damage that they did to me or my family? It is impossible to trace actually whose fault this was, but the reality is that up to the 18th century, up to the liberal ideas in Western white cultures in the United States and England, the idea that slavery is unnatural and owning another human being is wrong did not exist. People didn't question it. Like even in the Bible and in the Quran, they accept slavery. They don't say free your slaves. They say that you should be kind to your slaves and concubines, but they don't say that you should free them. It was according to custom when you fight a war that you should take slaves and sell them, and this is kind of like, say, your profit from the war. And this is what was happening in Africa. It is not the white people that came and enslaved the blacks. It was other black kind of fighting between each other, tribes, different tribes that were, let's say, taking other blacks and selling them into slavery to the whites. So they would just come to the shores in West Africa, buy the slaves from the other black people and move them to wherever they needed to move them. The idea that slavery is wrong and the attribution of abolishing slavery throughout the world, not only in the UK, in Britain, the British Empire at that time, and the United States, is entirely European and American. This has nothing to do with any non-Western culture. Actually could not understand the logic behind freeing your slaves and the fact that you should not own other human beings. There was a lot of push from England to do this, not only in their own territories, but also pushing other countries like the Ottoman Empire, for example. And the Ottoman Empire could not even understand why England is so concerned about the slaves. Like, this is normal thing. And because of laws, because of constant pressure, and because of actions that England and the United States have taken globally, slavery is now pretty much extinct, although still exists into some African countries, which is not talked about much. They are still modern day slaves and people do get kidnapped and enslaved, but that's a different topic. So first of all, slavery is not related to racism. Slavery is basically everybody who was vulnerable, no matter what their race was, they could be taken into a slave, and that was it. There was no question about it. Actually, white people and white Western people who are now blamed for everything that was the result of slavery were the main characters in the history who actually brought the end of slavery globally, not only on their territories. Then there is another topic on the slavery. Let's say if they were such protectors of the abolition and they wanted to get rid of slavery, why didn't they do it sooner? And here he talks really about The fact that when we are judging events from 300 years later, it's very easy for you to blame others and to say what should have been done and who was racist and who wasn't racist, because you were not there. You weren't born there. You don't know the situation, what it is to live in the 17th century, and also you don't give an idea about the consequences which could be done, let's say, if you only execute things. It's basically opinions of people who are theorists. He also argues that the abolitionists themselves were people who had just theory in mind but had no clue how to actually execute this and did not have an actual plan. They would be like, let's just free the slaves. And other people who were more concerned, let's say, who did the thinking, like Washington, like Lincoln and other people, were more concerned with the fact, well, we have a couple of millions that we will suddenly free, and they don't have skills and they don't have property. We need to figure out what to do with these people. Also, we need to figure out what will happen if we free them. Is it going to be a race war, which actually happened in Haiti, which was then called Santo Domingo. There was a racial war when the slaves were freed. This didn't happen in the United States, but could have happened. And they didn't know at that time whether this will not be the case, whether it will not unlock hostility both from whites and from blacks after the end of slavery. So there were a lot of factors to be considered. Second, also, the slaves that were bought, they costed money, that people have actually invested money in order to buy these human beings. So you should technically buy them off or compensate them. So who would compensate? Where would the money come to compensate the slave owners who technically would be stolen? Their property will be confiscated. So all these questions are very difficult to ask and to answer, because you are not living in the 17th century and you're not living in a society where still this is an institution that exists at every single level. This is like, let's abolish machines now in the 21st century because we are exploiting machines. Well, but everything functions with machines. We have to figure out ways on how to do this. Like, this is just a hypothetical, crazy thought of mine. Part 1 of this video, there is so much more of this book and super interesting one. I will create a second part next week. Please let me know in the comments if you like to learn more. Feel free to comment, share your opinion, and I definitely recommend you to read this book, as it's an absolutely must read for anyone who wants to talk about racism with educated opinion, not with emotions. Thanks so much for watching this video. Please subscribe to this channel and let me know in the comments. Have a great week.